I'm Anne, co-host of Transparency in Teaching, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hello and welcome to Black, Brown, and Bilingue, where our mission is to unite the Black and Brown communities through education, storytelling, and community engagement.
The vision of Black, Brown, and Bilingue is to be part of creating a world in which Black and Brown identities are affirmed, bilingualism and biculturalism are nurtured, and equity is the driving force behind all that we do. Thank you for joining us again today. I am Lisette Jacobson, and I am one of your hosts.
And I'm Maurice McDavid. I'm your other host.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever and wherever you are watching this. This, of course, is Black, Brown, and Bilingue, and we are so excited for our guest today. We have with us Ramses Ja and Q Ward, and they are the host of the nationally syndicated radio show and podcast Civic Cipher. Additionally, Ramses hosts the Black Information Network daily podcast, where he interviews Black journalists around the country to gain more insight into national news stories. Q is also a BMI published songwriter and former in arena DJ for the Phoenix Suns. Is that former? Is that correct, Q?
Yes, former.
Yes, as well
my
as
old retired age now.
See, I'm trying to get like you.
We should definitely.
Co-founder of the nonprofit The Change Society and owner of the media imprint Hip Hop Weekly. So both have over 20 years of experience in the DJ and broadcasting industry, and we're excited to have them with us today.
Yeah, and
excited
again,
to be here, man.
Just want to echo what Maurice said. And every time Maurice and I speak somewhere and people are reading off everything we've done, that feel? Because I always get kind of embarrassed, yeah, that's me.
I'll go first. I'll go first because I'm more like you. I sit and listen to those things, and I unintentionally kind of shrink a little bit, because the dynamic that we have is interesting, because I'm the big brother in age, but Ramses is my big brother as far as everything in this industry when it comes to, DJing and kind of curating in the hip hop space, broadcasting. He saw me and said, "Hey, you should do all this stuff. You'd be good at it." And I was like, "Oh, I'm not sure." And he was like, "No, you would be." And instead of waiting for me to figure it out or get on his side of the argument, he just pushed me in the pool, and I had to figure out how to swim. But to his credit, he's like, "You're going to be a professional swimmer when you get in the pool." And I'm like, "I don't really like water like that." He's like, "Trust me, Olympic level professional swimmer." So all the success I've had in this space, I will forever credit to Ramses, because it was more his vision for us as a team and his vision for his big brother than me thinking that I should go and try all these things. So when I listen to it, I'm like, man, Ramses's intro should be 11 minutes. And mine should be 30 seconds. But he very cleverly always makes sure that mine seems to have more in the way of awards and credentials and accomplishments. So I'm going to talk to him when we get done with y'all, because I know he did that on purpose.
Yeah. I was just watching an interview you guys were doing, and can you tell the listeners, I think it was with Kevin and the Bootleg podcast?
Bootleg Kev, yeah. Yes, indeed.
Yeah, Bootleg Kev. And you guys were talking about this radio station. So can you guys give a little bit of background as to what happened and what brings you to today?
Sure. So what I think you're referring to is discussing the origin story of our show, Civic Cipher.
Yes.
So that's something that I can probably take the lead on.
Indeed.
So yeah, as Q mentioned, we did we did other radio shows before Civic Cipher, and our time at that radio station, we always felt was invested well. We felt that we had that the powers that be kind of stood in solidarity with us, with our people, and so forth. And so ultimately, when 2020 rolled around, we're out in the streets, we're protesting, we're doing our part. Far be it from us to sit in our high tower on the mountain, as it were, and look down on all the common folk as they protest injustices that are happening, I guess, perhaps more directly in their stories than in ours. That's not either of our way, you know what I mean? And so we got our kids, we got, our families, we got out on the streets, and, this was our fight, the same as everyone else. And we saw that the people appreciated. And so there were some folks that I ended up meeting, the local BLM chapter. So I've been connected with the NAACP out here since I was a teenager, where I live in my city in Phoenix. When I was in college, I was a president of the Black Student Union, so it was an NAACP chapter in and of itself. So I've been a member since then. Through them, I knew some of the members of the local BLM chapter, and ended up connecting with them in 2020. And they appreciated the fact that, we're out on the streets, we're, making this our fight. And this was, prior to the numbers really swelling, because you remember there were like thousands of folks in all the cities. So, they came up with this idea that, we probably could do more. And I'm like, you're absolutely right. We can do more, we have more of a platform, more of a stage, more of a voice in this city. I hope that doesn't sound bad, but, you understand that working in media, you have the ability to, influence culture and, your immediate surroundings and so forth. So, had this idea to do, what was it, like a 30-minute show? And we wanted to do it in a weekend overnight time slot.
Can you explain what that means?
Yeah,
the
sure.
Weekend overnight part.
So for folks not familiar with radio or the inner workings, weekend overnight means basically it's not really valuable to the station. There is no ratings. You don't have the most listeners. This is not a sellable part of the radio station. It kind of coasts off the ratings of the station all around that. So weekend overnights, you're selling commercials for sometimes a penny, or they're free, or trade spots or whatever. Trades meaning you're trading commercials for other perks or whatever. Anyway, it wouldn't have cost the station any money, is the long and the short of it. And we only asked for 30 minutes. And what we wanted to do was bring those people from the streets up to the station and give them a stage so that they could explain why we were so upset about Breonna Taylor, or, what defund the police means, or, whatever was going on in that moment. And they're a lot more intelligent. These are social justice warriors. We're DJs, right?
Yeah. That's important.
Yeah. So we're like, let's do it. So I'm talking to the PD. This is where I take over, because Q wasn't at the station at this time. Talking to the PD, and because everyone had been furloughed, but I still had an open line of communication there. So talk to them, talk to the general manager and the owner. And I says, hey, we can probably do more than put a Black Instagram square.
Facts. Yeah.
This is a hip hop station. Right. What do we say? We play 70%. How do I say it?
Well, I don't even say those percentages because it dilutes it a little bit. Everything, all the money you guys make here is on the back of Black music.
There you go.
Period.
I was just about to say, I think you quoted it at like 100%.
Black music, yeah. 70% Black artists, 100% Black music. But you're absolutely right. Black culture, and you can do more, and you should. And here's how you can do it, and it won't cost you any money. Blah blah blah. We'll do it for free. Or if you don't want us doing it, you can get someone else to do it if we don't have the right temperament or whatever. But it needs to be done because we're on the street seeing this. You guys are going back to your houses at the end of the day. You're living your lives and putting your COVID masks on, and it's all good. But we have to live on the other side of this. I have to explain this to my children. So initially they agreed. They're like, yeah, we can definitely do that. And then they just kind of strung me along for a couple months, maybe. And then,
a few months, yeah.
And then finally they, the program director, his name was Frederico. That was his name, Fred, first name, last name Rico.
Okay, can I? I literally let's talk about this name real quick because I was watching you talk about this, and Maurice and I have done episodes on like the black brown divide. And when you said Frederico, I was like, is it Federico? Oh my God, was it a brown? Was he brown?
Yeah. Well, let me talk about this because I know exactly what you're talking about. And that's a big reason why we agreed to do this show, because solidarity between Black people and brown people is very important to us. You know, I'm from Los Angeles, and now we both live in Phoenix, Arizona. So we're we're in Mexico, what once was Mexico, right? We know exactly where we are. We know who our brothers are and our sisters are, and we also recognize that there are a lot of cultural things that have developed, especially in recent years, that have kind of strained relationships at different, points. And, that's a big part of what we need to fix. When the stuff was going on in LA with the people making those racist remarks and whatever, we had to kind of deal with that a little bit more delicately. So the reason I say these people's name, Frederico, and I say Ken Brentlinger, the owner of the radio station, and I say Paul Holton, the general manager of the radio station, is because those names need to be mentioned in this story. People need to be held accountable, and they need to learn a lesson. I am not mad at Frederico. Frederico and I were friends for 12 years. I like to hope that we will resume our friendship perhaps in another lifetime, but that man is not simply the worst thing he's ever done. But if I don't say his name, then that accountability is, he could say my name when I'm wrong, and that's something that I have, but whenever I do say his name, had I continued, I would have said that, he and I spoke. He wished us well on our journey, so he's not like a bad person, a racist person. He's a person that made a bad call at the wrong time to the wrong person, because what he said to me was, Ramses, I don't want to do a Black show. And so you kind of understand that moment. Saying that to me was unacceptable.
Yeah.
And so the rest of the story goes, I wrote a resignation letter. I kind of informed Q about it.
But I think he understood that he didn't need to.
Yeah.
Like in that space, you can speak for me, because he knew exactly how I would feel once I heard this story that you guys are hearing now.
Yeah. And bear in mind, we did a show together prior to my resignation. So if I'm leaving, then Q's coming
so
with me. It's kind of that
for the two of you, right? Essentially,
right. But I had a lot. I had the long-standing relationship with Fred and with the radio station in a more senior position in that moment. So, and with the community, because I'd been more closely associated with that radio station. I was kind of the I don't like how it sounds, but like the big name, if you will, at that station.
I like how it sounds because it's true.
I do too. Call it what it is.
Well, yeah, I appreciate that.
You know why people tuned in.
Yeah, and a lot of business came, and they needed someone. Imagine being a hip hop station, and nobody really looks hip hop. Nobody's as authentic. Nobody is a genuine expression of the culture, and no one is able to articulate the nuances of what's important, the direction, the movement, the momentum, speak to the streets, etc. No one's tapped in the way that I was for many years. And so yeah, that kind of was the case. So anyway, after I wrote that resignation, I posted it on social media, on Facebook and Instagram and so forth, and then ended up getting shared, and that ended up sort of turning into, sort of a groundswell movement, and people were very upset with the station because I remember I had cultivated my relationship with the people. And, as I mentioned, we had our, as you mentioned, rather, we had a nonprofit. And so we had been connecting with the community in very meaningful ways for 10 years at that point. Feeding homeless people in downtown Phoenix, and then just a number of other things that we did. MLK youth celebrations, HBCU college fairs. We work very closely with MECHA and with Poder in Action, and of course the BLM chapters and so forth. And so a lot of Black and brown unity, a lot of Black and brown solidarity, but it all kind of through the lens of hip hop. And so yeah, that's kind of what started the process. And after we resigned, folks ended up reaching out to us and saying, "Hey, what was that show you guys were trying to do? Because I think we could get a show like that on out here. That's really speaks to the moment, speaks, and so now we're up to I forget the number, but we're over 30 stations around the country, and we're about this close to effectively doubling that number. We're still working out a couple of things with a major media corporation, and they want to put us on another, I think it's like 35, 36 stations. So we'll find out more, I think the last day of this month, the last day of January. So
awesome.
They've already said yes, but we just need to figure out how it works.
When Federico told you we don't want to do a Black show, did you read into it like how did you receive that? Did you view it as like, oh, that's a business decision? Do you think people were in his ear telling him like the station doesn't want that right now? Like, what do you think influenced him to get to that point?
That's a great question.
A hip-hop question, like a hip-hop station. Like, how did he come up with that?
I don't think I've been asked that before. I'm glad you asked me that, because I think I have a good answer for you. So
yeah, we definitely got a good answer for that question.
So yeah, Fred was not a hip hop person. He was a radio person. Okay. Is a radio person. I don't act like he's not here anymore, but he's a radio guy. Right. He became hip hop by proximity, which a lot of people do. That's not the worst thing in the world, but being sort of hip hop and being accepted in hip hop spaces, that sort of thing, that is not the same as being Black. And, there's certain things that you cannot see, you cannot feel, you don't live in the same fear. You don't have the same concerns. You don't see the same things when you look at your children, right? And you can make the argument that it's similar because, Federico, he's from a place called Tucson, Arizona. It's, Southwest, relatively like medium-sized city, but that moment was a decidedly Black moment. Black Lives Matter. These were the things that were happening. And that radio station is a decidedly Black, from a cultural perspective, station. Federico I'd say he's probably 90% radio, maybe 4 to 5% hip hop, and the rest is other. Is not a bad person. Again, that's just who he was. And when he said what he said, I do think it was him trying to make a business decision. I think it was a decision that was made out of fear. And a decision that he perhaps made without fully consulting the wishes of Paul Holton and maybe even the owner, Ken Bretlinger. That's something I don't know, but I did talk to Paul, and Paul really seemed enthusiastic about the idea. So when Fred said that to me, it was just the wrong way to articulate what I think he was trying to say. Q has said this before. You say like if he had. Go ahead.
I think it's important that the conversation happened with Ramses, because Ramses was, even in that moment, able to give him some latitude that I wouldn't have been able to, just because they had a much closer and more cultivated relationship. Because even if it was a business decision, the language could have been, you know what, guys, we don't want to do a polarizing show. Or you know what, Ramses, maybe we don't want to get into politics. Like, there's so many different ways that you could have said it.
Coded language he could have used.
We would have had to understand. When you say we don't want to do a Black show, we also understand. But then you've also made a decision for us. Yeah. So there's so many different ways that could have been articulated if it was just a business decision. So I give far less room and far less grace, because even if you were making a fearful business decision, there's a different way that you could have said it, especially to him.
That's what it's like. Wow.
I've got to call out that as a hip hop station, Ramses, I appreciate that you said this brother is 90% radio and 4 to 5% hip hop. And it shows, because if you have any understanding of hip hop, it is a music of the people. It is a music of change. It's a music of education. Yeah. It's a music of protest. So how can we be out here marching? Which I love to hear that. I'll just throw out there real quick. And we've done an episode on interracial marriage. I always like to joke with folks. I'm married to this white woman, and she told me, she said, "Hey, the protest is next Saturday, and we're going." She made the signs, and I had to pull her back and said, "Hey, don't talk to the police like that," because she was ready to go ham. So I appreciate my wife, anyways. But yeah, had the family out there. But the songs that we're singing, right as we're marching through our city, are songs of hip hop and Black culture, right? They're
sure. Some of those songs came from slave fields, man. Those was heavy. That was heavy chants.
Yeah.
I do think, man, that's very problematic to own a hip hop station and not be willing to let hip hop do what hip hop does. Right? Like to only view it as that money making lens, I think is, man.
Yeah, that's quite unfortunate. And our task since then has been to charge our often enough white male Christian brothers, heterosexual brothers.
Can you explain why you just made those specific?
There's a very specific type of individual that wields influence in ways that are very much invisible to most folks. But when you distill it down, you boil it down, you recognize that wealthy, often enough, or well-compensated white heterosexual males who are Christian, people born with really no strikes against you in this country, in our estimation, are making decisions that affect and borrow from and influence the direction and chronicle the narratives of cultures that they basically can just profit from it and ruin it or drag it through the mud or play 10 songs in a row where there's no redeeming there's all violence and all that sort of stuff. And to be honest with you, I'm a huge fan of hip hop. I'm born from it, right? Compton, California, 1982, man. So that was where I grew up, right? I myself spent some time as a music director for a radio station, and even I would program songs in such a way to where there wasn't an overload of, too much heavy stuff. What people deem negativity, I don't really see it as that. I know some songs, yes, absolutely. But for the most part, I think people are kind of telling their stories. But if you program one specific way, then you misrepresent the broad spectrum that is hip hop culture, right? And these are mistakes that we often find with those Christian heterosexual white Christian males who are often at the heads of companies and radio stations, media imprints that are using Black culture, brown culture, any dominant culture in our society and profiting from it without having to deal with the repercussions of it. So yeah, when we go to radio station, we say, hey, can you pick up Civic Cipher? It'll cost you an hour a week, but you're gonna be forever entrenched right with the people, and we'll hold you down. People like to push back because they want that, even if it's a weekend overnight time slot and it's only good for $50, they want that $50, right? Yeah. And we have to let them know, and I've said this before, this is our table, right? This is our culture. We don't mind if you eat from our table, but make sure you save us a seat, right? And I think that that's a fair ask because, to be fair, it's capitalism. We don't love that, but that's what it is. And people are trying to get money and feed their families the same as we do. But you don't have to be greedy. And if your greed comes at the expense of the safety and the cultural integrity of your brothers and sisters of African descent, then you're taking too much, and we have to teach you how to love us properly. And so this is kind of the energy that we have when we go into these stations. But we're not soft when we do these asks, but I don't think the ask is all that hard.
I love that last point of we're not soft when we do the ask. I listened to a brother. I don't know if you all know Sho Baraka. Sho Baraka is a hip hop artist out of Southern California, Christian hip hop artist. Okay. And the brother says in one of the songs, he says, we leave Egypt happy to speak resistance, then turn around and ask Pharaoh for his assistance. And I thought, what a beautiful idea.
That's a bar
that well represents kind of some of the things that we deal with in this country, right? Like you talked about as capitalists, other folk owning the radio stations. And so you are having to do that ask. But I love that you said, I'm not soft with it. I'm not going to bend it to fit into what you're looking for. So,
hola, ¿te gusta nuestro contenido?
Then go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. So the end result was the Civic Cipher. I do have a question about that. Tell me about that name, right? Because when I hear Cipher, I think hip hop, I'm thinking double XL Cipher, freshman Cipher.
Yeah.
That's exactly where your mind should go.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So in short, I got to credit a dear friend of ours and mentor. Her name is Dr. Camilla Westenberg. She's the vice president, I want to say, of the like the Arizona NAACP or whatever, but we've known her for decades. She was my mentor when I was in college and my professor, actually. So the books I learned from when I was a teenager, I'm 40 now. So those books downstairs at my house, she taught me from those books. And when this was all happening, she was kind of a counselor to us, I'd say. Yeah.
Not was, is.
Yeah, still. She's I'd say late 70s now, 77, 78, somewhere in there. And she's been on this journey for a long time, and we had to get ready for it real quick. Because remember, we was in the clubs DJing, we was bringing in the next Cardi B record.
We have to always bring it back to that part.
Yeah, that's where and so in talking to her, she had an initiative with the NAACP called From the Circle to the Cipher. And that initiative was where she was trying to bring sort of like the village elders, the circle, to the cipher, which is kind of younger people, and have these like conversations about what activism looks like and what you should and shouldn't do, because there's a lot of wisdom, stored in these minds who have been, out here, 60, 70, 80 years sometimes. And there's young people with a lot of energy and enthusiasm, but perhaps don't have the same, strategies, built up over a long period of time. So when she said the name Circle to the Cipher, she's like, you're welcome to use that name for your show if you want. And it didn't quite fit, but, at the time we were kind of having to deal with police, like literally as we were protesting. They were snatching us up off the streets. They didn't snatch me because, again, I have a bit of a higher profile and I was always with my children and I was well insulated. There were a lot of groups. Again, I mentioned Poder in Action. It's a group out here that works primarily with Hispanic communities and Spanish speaking brothers and sisters. And then another group called White Paws, White People Against White Supremacy, and those would be kind of our bodyguards. So that stuff never happened. But yeah, civic was the word that really fit a little bit better, and so Civic Cipher. And you're absolutely right. Hip hop, is sort of a circle. In our studio, we have a round table, and we have a Civic Cipher every week. And,
that was very intentional. Yeah. It was supposed to make your mind go exactly where it went.
Yeah. It's a activist social justice show for a hip hop space. So we target hip hop stations with our content. And of course we have the podcast as well. So
that's awesome. So just to kind of switch gears a little bit, you kind of alluded to this, or I alluded to the Black Brown divide that Maurice and I actually talk about on our podcast. And that was sort of the impetus for us to come together and have this. Maurice and I met like 10, 12 years ago, but then really got close during we took some courses together. And we would always leave class and we would get into these big like discussions around race, ethnicity, so anything social justice. But then with George Floyd, we started in 2020 also, life kind of slowed down. And one of our first topics was to really tackle like, why is there this divide and why don't people like to talk about it? And part of me is like, we typically don't like to air out our dirty laundry in public spaces, but then at the same time, it's like, how do we address the issues if we can't even be real with one another? Because I grew up I'm from Chicago, and like I struggle to relate to some of the Latinos that are in border towns because culturally they have a very different experience. Like I'm first generation. I saw what my parents went through working all the time. Whereas even some people in border towns are very anti-immigrant because they're there. So there's always these little rubs even within the Mexican community, but then on top of that with the Black community, yet no one wants to talk about it. Like, why do you think that is? And what do you think is the rub? How about that?
Two very, very different questions. So I'll start with the first one. Talking about the divide, talking about issues in general. If you're convinced that you partially benefit from any of these problems, you're hesitant to address them. When you talk about capitalism, patriarchy, monarchy, a lot of women don't speak up against male chauvinism or misogyny, because if your husband runs a corporation and he's filthy rich and you get a really good life from it, it's hard to be on the front line talking about men shouldn't be running everything. Well, so you talk about people in border towns. If they feel like immigrants coming from the city just south of them are going to take their jobs or make their neighborhoods less safe, they get indoctrinated with this poison from those who stand to profit most from it. So it's some skullduggery, right? Like there's so many things that were put into place to keep us divided, because the list of things that we have in common is almost infinite. If we just, hey, let's talk about all the things that are alike, we'd be talking for hours. The list of things that divide us is this long. But if you can make us afraid that those things will take you and push you down, then it's going to be very, very uncomfortable to talk about those things that keep us apart. So they found a way to create this hierarchy, everything from, the model minority to the Willie Lynch letters, to, again, the American dream. Capitalism requires that a group of us have nothing. In order for the system to function, somebody has to not have anything.
Zero. Yeah.
Right? So I don't have to pay you more if somebody has nothing. They'll do it for less than you. They don't have anything.
And it keeps everything in check.
You know what I'm saying? So all of these systems were put in place so that those that stand to profit the most could remain there. They trick us into fighting amongst each other, make each of us think that we're responsible for each other's problems when it's them. And by dangling the carrot that, hey, one day you could be me.
Yes.
You don't really want to speak against me, because then what happens when you're in this position?
100%.
You'll never be in that position. That's the point, right? But if you think, if you're poor and white,
I was just going to go there.
Fighting against Black people to protect rich and white just on the basis that you're white, then all of you will remain poor. All the poor and white, all the minority and poor will remain poor, because there's far more of us that don't have than that do. So we have to keep the have-nots divided. If they ever unified and fought against us, they'd take over the whole world.
This is what Martin Luther King was preaching around the time he passed away, when he was murdered.
So the reason why so many of these conversations are uncomfortable, because it's just like we were talking about a story in sports. I don't remember how many shows ago, but when these things happen that should be obvious causes for outcry from everybody pauses for a second, like, wait, have I ever done anything wrong? Have I ever done anything similar to that? Is there anything in my closet that looks or sounds like that? Okay, I know that dude is being a racist jerk, but I'm not sure how I was talking when I was in college, or if somebody might have recorded that conversation I was having. So let me not jump out here too aggressively against that person, because I don't ever want everybody to look back at me, right? So if you make everyone operate out of the fear, no one wants to say anything too loud. Like imagine Ramses and I, right? We have a lot of years of flawed living. We are not, we remind people all the time, the reason why we start with we were DJs, because we were not scholars in this space. Ramses says all the time, and there's no better way to say it, we are learning how to fly this plane in the air while it's being built. Right? We're not experts and we're not perfect. We're not moral superiors to anybody, but we do feel, we do have children, we are empathetic. So we should start from there. So building the bridges are easy, but there's so much indoctrination put in place to keep us divided. Your second question was, what is the divide, or what is the rub?
Yeah, what do you think? I mean, you kind of answered that. And if you want to expand on it, but then even what can we do to like bridge it? I know it's getting better, but listen, I still hear the things, and like people assume just because I'm Mexican that they can say certain things. And I'm like, no, like that's not cool.
It's getting better, but so much slower than we would like.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like Ramses and I, the dynamic between Ramses and I, the reason that our show works, the reason why our dynamic works, the reason why we're allowed to be very much two different sides of the same coin, right? It's like we couldn't be more alike and more different at the same time. But it starts with, I love Ramses and Ramses loves me. Everything else we can figure out. And that's the same with all of us. The reason why I can come on here and be angry and mad is because Ramses loves. So it's like, okay, Q, I get that you're pissed off, but you can't be mad into perpetuity. Like, we can't ever get to where we're trying to go if you won't forgive and you won't teach and you won't educate and you won't build that bridge. The person can't be, like you said, they can't be the worst thing they've ever done forever. You can't say, nope, you messed up, so you're disqualified. No.
Oh, that's cancel culture.
You have to be willing to build. Yes, you have to be willing to educate, rebuild, reconcile, so that we can do better. And, you know, I air my frustrations every time we turn this microphone on, because the progress that we should be making is happening way too slow for me. And I am in the moment most times way less forgiving because I don't like being slapped on both cheeks. Like my mom taught me turn the other cheek when I was a kid. Okay, when you slap the other cheek, I'm not turning it again.
Right, I ran out of cheeks to turn.
I only have two cheeks, fam. So what we doing now? And Ramses has to be like, Q, come here, bro.
Maurice is that for me. That is so funny. Maurice is that for me. And Maurice is the Rev, right? And I remember the first few times that I would let out a swear word, I'd be like, oh. But now he's to the point where if he hears me and I'm upset and I'm going off, he's like, oh, I know you're mad because you're swearing. And usually you catch yourself, but you're just letting it fly right now. And so he's that for me. And Maurice, I love you, even though I don't tell you enough because you get on my nerves. Like,
same. Actually, you did tell me, remember the other day we was getting off the phone awkwardly. She was like, all right, I love you, bye. I was like, I love you too. I mean, I do, but it was one of those moments. At any rate, so two quick thoughts. Man, I know I had a chance to listen to your episode in which you were discussing Will Smith and that forgiveness piece, you know, and I love what you all keep referencing, right? We are not the worst thing. The worst day of our life does not define us, right? Mm-hmm. We are this mixture of everything.
People are complicated, yeah.
People are complicated, 100%. But I think you kind of are, you've continued to reference this slowness, right? And so I tweeted the other day just a quote from Dr. King where he talks about, he says, and it's in the I Have a Dream speech, right? And we never quote this part. We always, I have a dream. We stay stuck on the dream. And Dr. King says, we are faced with the fierce urgency of now.
Wow.
Right. And you know, he says, we are faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. This is no time for apathy or complacency. This is a time for vigorous and positive action.
Talk that talk, Doc.
And so we don't quote that part of the speech, right? Because that's less, it'll get better tomorrow. Yeah. Now, in your on your website, you all talk about, you're having some conversations around that DEI space, and it's incredible because everybody and their mama now has a DEI coordinator, has a DEI, and if you want, you could just go and get paid somewhere and take on the role. The problem is some places aren't even hiring hiring somebody. They're picking the Black person who works for them and says, "You're now our DEI coordinator."
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
The entire minority here, so represent them.
You now are going to represent that, and here's additional responsibilities, but no extra pay.
We're not giving you more money.
Nah, son.
So I guess one of my questions for you all, as we engage in these conversations around DEI, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusion, for any listeners who don't know what that is referencing. What are the things that you think are going well in that space? And what are some of those pet peeves maybe that you have? Like some things where you like, okay, enough of that.
Enough of the black square on Instagram, right? Like all this performative junk.
If you go to the website of just in your opinion, whoever you think are the top companies on earth, whenever you get a chance, just go to their website. There is absolutely a page on DEI. The company I work for is DEIB, right? Diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Take it a step further. And on our national calls every week, someone has to talk about it. So I appreciate the steps are being made, but they asked me to talk about it one week, and they had to know it wasn't going to go like everyone else's, because now this is what I do, right? Like we referenced the DJ space because we were very, very novice when this started. This is what we do now. Yeah. So we can sit and have this conversation with whoever feels like having it. I was thankful that I've worked with some leaders at that company where DEI is not just for PR. It's not just good marketing. However, like I referenced, the top companies on earth, you pick the Golden Arches, the Swoosh, the Piece of Fruit, they have a page on it. I'm not sure how real it is, right? But everybody wants to be on the right side of the visual. Everybody wants to be on the right side of, the marketing of DEI. You have to wonder how serious most of these places are, right? You have to look into their hiring practices. A lot of those companies actually list that info. I think that's important. The percentages of people in leadership that are minorities, that are women, you can actually see that information. I think that's going a step further than most companies want to. Most companies want to take a picture, literally have the four of us show up, take a picture, and then put that picture on the website, wearing a t-shirt from that company. Look how diverse we are. Not telling anybody the only 4 people in the office that look like us are us, right? So for a lot of companies, it's performative, and that's frustrating. And every place that I've worked has a lot of room to improve, but I shout out my brother here a lot because he teaches me a lot of things real time. It's not like a lesson he taught me when we first met. Like, no, every single time we sit at this table, I walk away having learned something more. So the idea that progress is being made, what Ramses always says, it's not nothing. And that's sincere. The fact that they're taking steps at all is something. I just wish those steps were bigger and were more impactful. And I haven't been into every boardroom in the country, of course, but I have been in enough of these spaces to realize for some of these companies it's performative, and that's frustrating.
Yeah, Maurice and I, we provide professional development schools, and we were just at a high school where one of the Black male employees was just extremely frustrated at how slow these things move sometimes. And I think Maurice and I even found ourselves kind of at a loss, like, what are those little measures of success? Those little increments. How are you going to track that along the way so that you're moving in the right direction, and so that you don't lose? I think it just breaks your spirit after a while. Like,
sure,
this is heavy. I feel like I've been fighting my whole life, and yet I see very little progress. For you guys, what does that look like? You have those little measures of success, and freedom dreaming, Maurice, that we talked about this summer, where we know the obstacles that are there. We know the systems that we want to dismantle. But do we even have the capacity to dream up a new world where, from its infancy, organizations or institutions are built with DEIB in mind?
Wow.
That's a great question. And we have a tradition around here of being brutally honest. So I will say that is a great question. And I'll also say that that's not something that I've ever been asked before. So what you're going to hear is my first thoughts on it. I hope that they're well received by you and our listeners. But if I had to come up with a metric, it would look something like this. The population of this country is, we'll say 13% Black, 14% Latino, so forth and so on, right? If a company wanted metrics that they could look at and say, okay, we're working toward this goal, or this is the optimum scenario. If it's a national company, their national promotion practices, hiring practices, compensation practices, in terms of their overall amount of money that they pay out to employees, 13% should go to Black people, 14% should go to the amount of people hired, 13%, you know what I mean? And for local companies, it should reflect their immediate environment. I wouldn't impose those same type of metrics on a company based and operating solely in a place like Wyoming. One of the things that is very cool about both Q and I is we've been able to do a lot of traveling. And as a result, I've been to all 50 states. I've seen exactly how diverse this country is. And I've been to places where people live right in the middle of a city and they are extremely closed-minded. And I've seen people live out in the sticks where you'd think they'd be the most racist people in the world, and they have just wide open hearts and they want to learn, but they have no one to learn from. So if I'm just giving a rule to anyone listening today, and not knowing your company, your corporate culture, anything like that, if you make sure that the amount of people that are arrested and go to jail are 13, if that's your goal, you know what I mean? If good, bad, right, wrong, indifferent, if it reflects the population, then I think that you're taking steps toward inclusivity and belonging, I believe was the last one. And so I know it's probably going to get a little bit more complicated beyond that, but again, this is the first time I've been asked the question,
Sure.
That's what I would go with.
Q, is there anything you want to add? Or
I think just making room in those metrics for women, right? I don't want the entirety of your diversity to be made up of men. Like, we got this many Black people. Oh, but they're all men. Well, you're missing the point here, sir or ma'am. Yeah. That's definitely.
It's funny.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I'm like all jacked up this morning. It's all this coffee. That's something that Maurice and I still talk about. It's like we'll go into meetings with other people. Even recently, we were talking with a publishing company, and they always address him. And it's very interesting. And it was a white space, but they address Maurice. And I get it. He's a lovable guy. Like, I want to, I get it. Did people say he talks like Obama? But
that's hilarious.
I think that's tongue in cheek.
It is. There's something in that too, but we don't have time for that.
There's a lot.
I can't not hear it now. That's funny. I didn't think so before.
Now that you
say
this, like,
it's going to be that every time. Thank you.
So, but people will address him. And so it's interesting, like, he's a Black male, I'm a Latina, and even there, his gender sometimes is above. And then there are times where, me being Latina puts me a step above. So it's just been very interesting. And I think I listened to this really awesome TED Talk where there's this notion that women just are not confident. And that, if we want them to succeed in the corporate world, we just need to help them build their confidence. And really at the core of it, women are very confident and competent. It's that confidence in women is received very differently than confidence in men, right? And so you can walk in and just be a confident person or know that you have the same abilities as your male counterparts, but that will not be received the same. And so I really try to address that piece too of like, women are confident. We know what we know, and be mindful of that. And women, unfortunately, do that to each other too. Like we feed into that white male mentality sometimes.
All of us do. Yeah. All of us feed into those practices. Again, we've been taught the way that we all like there are women who think the world is better when being run by men, but that's
all they've ever seen.
Yeah, they don't know
right.
it. Like it's not a decision that they're making in most cases, but more something that they were even subconsciously or unconsciously being taught from from childhood. So there's so many cases where, again, it's hard to ask the woman who's married to the most powerful man in the world to stand up against men being in power. She benefits from it so much. And you can break that down, not just to men and women, but Black men, right, benefit from a world where the men are in charge, even though that world might be against our people as a whole. Right. We talked about code switching on a show recently. Yeah. Walking into these spaces where it's more acceptable to speak the way that all of us speak, and not to what was the word you used, Rams? Jive.
Oh, talking jive. That's an old way of describing basically. Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's again, it's hard to break away from the things that divide us because we've been taught that they are to our benefit.
If you liked this episode and would like to see more, check out these videos.